Hello, I'm Anita, founder of Anita's List and host of the Anita's List podcast. Over the last 20 years, I've helped more than 12,000 first-time parents choose all their baby kit and prepare for parenthood, both practically and emotionally. I'm delighted to welcome my great friend and sister-in-law, Melissa Frost, who, thank goodness for our family, married my brother Tom 24 years ago. They were also clients of mine when they had their first of their three fabulous children, Ella, William, and Amelia. Melissa talks about her experience as a trailing spouse, moving from country to country with Tom's job, and the challenges of having to put her career on hold, being quite literally not allowed to work in some countries. She shares her excellent top tips for travelling with young children and setting up home multiple times in different countries. I so hope you enjoy our conversation and find it helpful too.
And today I'm welcoming the wonderful, wonderful Melissa, my sister-in-law. My goodness me, I have laughed with you, cried with you, worked with you. Oh my goodness me, one of my favourite humans on the planet. Thank you for marrying my brother, because that's worked out really well.
It really has. Oh, thank you. What a lovely introduction. And it's real joy to be here and such an honour to be asked. So thank you for bringing me along.
My pleasure, my pleasure. You had an amazing career before Ella came.
So I stopped work just before she was born. I think a month or two. I certainly took my maternity sort of 4 weeks of leading up to having her. But yeah, that was weird as well, because I couldn't, I think my whole identity was very much informed by what I was doing at work and who I was at work. And suddenly letting go of that and not quite yet knowing what it was to be a mum. I mean, at that point, I was just a woman with a bump.
Yes.
It was quite discombobulating, actually. And not long after that, I mean, I think it was around the first Christmas that she was born, we found out that my husband, Tom, was going to be sent to South Korea to work. So I then had that double whammy of not working, actually a triple whammy. So not working, being a stay-at-home mum to a young baby, and they don't write manuals, so I had not really got any idea what I was doing. And then suddenly facing this really quite big international move. And for me, that was moving overseas for the very first time ever, away from my parents, away from my brothers, away from just that whole support network that I had built around me in those last few months of pregnancy. You know, my NCT class, my just friends that I'd met locally in the community, and that it was a really daunting prospect, all of that.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And I think we could see your home from our home.
Yes.
And there were times where we'd cook for 4 and then just walk the other 2 meals around the corner to your house and vice versa. You know, that community that is so lovely. When you live in a place, you go to antenatal classes in a place, you have your babies for the first few weeks, is so critical. That village that we have lost to a large degree.
And we so depended on each other. I remember those days so clearly, where we just... You'd appear at the front door with a steaming plate of spaghetti bolognese or something, and it was so welcome.
But likewise, because you were there when Mia was born. And so we had exactly the same thing. And Tom and I think Tom was on his month on, month off working. So sometimes he was around for a month. And we'd go for walks by the river. And there was one famous moment where I think he was looking after Mia for about the first time. And he was sort of messaged me going, something's happening. She's gone really red in the face. I'm not really, this looks like a crisis. Of course, it was a major punami that was in the works. But we were all learning on the job.
Yeah. And I remember during pregnancy getting really swept up into what I now realise was actually quite a niche little world of all the things that everybody in my immediate circle felt was really important. You know, things like only ever eating organic food, or everybody was talking about cranial osteopaths. And there was, I don't know, I just remember that there were a very set list of things that everyone had to consider, and everyone had to follow that list. And it wasn't until I got to South Korea with a 4-month-old baby, and there was none of that. I mean, literally nothing. I think there were only 2 other women that I met in the whole time that I was there who had children the same age. I mean, had a baby the same age as me.
Wow.
So, and one was Korean, the other was English, and all the other expat women that I came across who could speak my language were all from America, much older, mostly in their 60s, late 50s, early 60s, who'd had children who'd already flown the nest, and they tended to be there just as couples. So suddenly my whole sort of reference, all my references changed overnight. And that whole frame of reference just changed. And I just thought that I honestly felt very lost. I felt very at sea. It didn't really feel like there was anything I could grab onto that was reassuring. But actually, going to South Korea at that point and having that experience was the most amazing learning curve, I think, especially for becoming a parent.
Yes.
Because I had to kind of figure it out on my own.
Yes.
And I had to filter lots of different ideas from lots of different people who'd all had different experiences of parenting in different countries and everything else. Sort of try and filter that out for myself and decide what to believe, what not to believe, what to do, what not to do. It was things like, I don't know, people here were saying things like you shouldn't give your child any dairy for, I don't know, until they were over 8 months or something. I can't even remember the details. And I remember having that fixed in my head and thinking, I must remember to not give her dairy, or, sort of counting the weeks towards the point when I'd be able to give her dairy. And then one of these American women saying, oh, don't be so silly. Of course you can have a little bit of dairy. Just give her a tiny little bit on the end of your spoon or something.
Yeah.
Just try it.
Yeah.
And I remember being so horrified by this sort of what felt like a really irresponsibble approach.
Yes.
And certainly not learned, certainly not something that was taken out of a textbook or anything like that. But actually it ended up being the most amazing learning, because I learned from that experience to be more intuitive as a mum.
How interesting.
And to sort of read my child and to feel in my heart, what was the best thing to be doing at that point. And I think I let go of a lot of the restrictions that society had put up, certainly in southwest London when I'd been living in Barnes. But yeah, it was a really interesting, freeing experience.
And unexpected, because actually I always think that first 4 months of your first child is arguably the hardest of our lives. It's also known as the 4th trimester, I think, for good reason. And I think, you just come through that 4th trimester. During it, I think week 6 and week 10, I always think are the hardest. And it was probably somewhere between week 6 and week 10 that Tom came home and said, by the way, we're moving to South Korea. I mean, as you say, very discombobulating. And then your feelings as you got on the plane, I bet there were a lot of tears. I can't even remember that we saw you off.
I remember the removals van parked outside our house, and we loved that house, and we both saved and saved and saved to buy it, and we were so proud of it. And I just remember this removals van driving off with all our worldly belongings inside it, and me literally standing there with Ella in my arms, sort of watching this lorry just disappear down the street, and really having no idea what the future held in store for any of us. And really thinking at that point, gosh, what's the next chapter? What's it all going to look like? And yes, I had a huge lump in my throat. I'm sure I shed a tear or two, because I was sorry to be leaving that chapter behind. And I remember getting on the flight and being, on the one hand, really excited because we got to fly business class, and that was quite nice.
Major.
But then immediately regretting that excitement, because I was flying business class with a brand new tiny baby, and the looks that we got from people in business class, quite understandably worried that this baby was going to keep them awake all night on the plane. And, it just so happened that Ella got her very first cold on that flight. So that made her snivelly and unable to breathe properly and miserable. And she did scream and it was awful. And I couldn't wait for that flight to be over. I remember that very clearly. And it was a really long journey. We had to fly to Tokyo, then we had to fly to Busan in South Korea. Then we had to get a ferry, I think we then got a ferry across to the mainland, and then we had to get a taxi, and we turned up in the dead of night.
Yeah, gosh, always hard to do, actually.
Turned up in the dead of night in this hotel in the middle of what felt like nowhere. Absolutely miles and miles and miles and hours and hours and hours from leafy barns. And woke up the next day to discover that there had been a huge monsoon on the island that we had gone to live on, and the whole place just looked a complete mess. It was just mess everywhere. Wow. That's what I remember. And so going from that ordered, tidy orderliness of southwest London, and that just felt like my safe zone.
Yes,
to this completely different place on the other side of the world.
Sort of movie moment.
It was really strange waking up in the morning, and then having to adjust to so many different things, but also with this brand new baby who was giving me things to adjust to on a daily basis.
Yes.
Whether it was breastfeeding, weaning, I don't know, the colour of her nappies. I mean, there were so many different things that I was focused on.
Yeah.
But it was lots of different emotions actually that were going on. And I do remember probably for the first 6 months feeling desperately homesick for all those things I'd left behind, and feeling very much at sea because I didn't have that support network that I realised I was really quite dependent on at that point. And having to adjust to making friends in an expat community, having to figure out how that was all going to work with a brand new baby.
And also it was new to you. I mean, Tom and I grew up moving countries every 3 to 4 years our whole lives.
Yeah.
And you had, you've lived in one place, in one city, and amazing.
Yeah.
So you've got that whole culture shock, really. Plus your hormones. At 4 months, we're still very new parents. I always think it takes about a year to feel even vaguely like ourselves. But we do come through it, which is amazing. But, it was a massive amount to take on. And what did you do in terms of kit? Because before Ella was born, we forget that there was no internet in those days. It was really going around shops. And seeing things in person. It wasn't ordering online and same for information as well. It was harder.
That was the other challenge that we had because we didn't know what we'd be able to get on this island off the south coast of South Korea.
Yes.
I mean, we knew we were going to be quite remote. And someone advised us to pack what we would need in our shipment for the whole time we were going to be there, so 3 or 4 years.
Gosh.
It's because we didn't know what we'd be able to buy for our child.
Yes.
So having just become parents and just discovering what a baby was all about, we were then having to try and figure out, well, what would we need?
Oh my gosh.
In 6 months' time? What would we need in 12 months' time? What would she need in 18 months' time, right up to pretty much age 4? Like, what would she be needing?
Yes.
And that was things like buggies. It was things like toys, developmental toys. Like, what sort of things might we need? We also, of course, had to think about the journey and travelling there. We had to think about all the different sleeping options. Because at that point, she was still in a Moses basket and a carry cot when we moved out there, but we knew we were going to have all kinds of different extras.
Yes.
And I think, of course, you can get all that stuff in Korea, but we just had no idea what would be there. And it was quite nice to have the choice, but at the same time, what an overwhelming choice.
Yeah.
So that's where just getting really good advice was imperative. And there are certain pieces of kit that I'm just so grateful that we had, that someone had mentioned and said, you must have this.
Yeah.
So one was a very clever little device that was this little travelling high chair that folds flat.
The Handysitt.
There we go. I knew you'd remember the name.
I think that was, because you were a client back in the day.
That was brilliant. That was one of the
thank
best.
goodness. And the Handysitt, it's disappeared. It was the best piece of kit
It was
ever.
the best piece of kit ever.
I think Stocker bought the company, but I haven't seen it for a while. I must investigate.
The other piece of kit that I loved actually was our playpen.
Yes.
Which felt so old-fashioned.
Yeah.
And I know you do the most wonderful playpen now, and I'm so delighted to see that it's there and out there and, for modern parents. But we had one of those slightly old-fashioned hexagonal-shaped ones that had a little gate that you could open and close.
Combell was the name of the company.
Oh, well
absolutely, I remember it.
Well.
Yeah. Like it was yesterday.
But that was so clever because it came with a little mattress, a little sort of padded floor mat, which actually was quite generously padded, so much so that we ended up using that as a mattress when Ella was about 8 months old, I guess, inside the wardrobe of a hotel room. We didn't close the door, but just, that's where she slept, and it meant she couldn't roll out or, get in the... I don't know. So that was great, and it also had a little tent that could go over the top.
Exactly. I remember it was brightly coloured, wasn't it?
Out of that,
yellows and reds. It was all the primary colours, wasn't it? Very educational.
That was very useful. And I think probably the most useful thing that I have ever had for all 3 children was the baby carrier. I think we had the baby Bjorn one. But just that for travelling was completely magic. I mean, it's the most gorgeous thing to use anyway. And actually, funny enough, Tom enjoyed it so much because that was his little bonding moment. Where he could snuggle
also,
his
you've
babies.
Done your carrying by that point. It's quite nice to delegate.
Exactly. But it just gave me, not just for travelling, but even just around the home, it just gave me the opportunity to carry my baby, but have use of my arms. And that for all kinds of things, going shopping, doing the cleaning, just travelling through an airport, absolutely brilliant. So that was my top.
Yes,
top
how interesting. So baby carrier, playpen, and what was the first one you mentioned?
Handysitt, highchair thing. That was brilliant.
How cool. So actually, 2 things for travelling. And in the house, and 1 thing for in the house. Because, of course, your children are all very active. So it's really nice if they get used to a playpen from day one. If the doorbell goes, you can put them in and they'll be safe. And then you can quickly go to the loo. I mean,
so many different uses for that playpen. And then, of course, later it was just such a fun little tent, a little house almost for Ella. And I remember her kind of opening the little gate and being able to go in and out. And so that was brilliant. That was a really good piece of kit.
And for our listeners who are living in London, who have found themselves in a city that they're not from or they haven't grown up in, because London's such a transient city. So many people come here for work for 3 or 4 years, and perhaps they've come themselves to work or they've come with their partners who are working. Hearing your story, I think, is so valuable, because it's not the easiest thing at all to move everything and move country with a child.
But it's possible, and it is an adventure. And I think looking back now, and, we've lived in, 4 different countries since then.
3 continents.
Yes, exactly. And I look now at who my children are, and I'm so proud of who they are, because they are so at ease in any situation, with any person, with any accent, with any name. You can chuck anything like that at them, and they are just able to negotiate all of those things with ease. But they also have a real cultural sort of sensitivity, which I think is really great to see. And they're curious and interested. And I've lost count of how many times my eldest, Ella, has said, "I'm so grateful you made me try all those flavours." She said, "I've got so many friends at uni who've never tried a chickpea, or who've got no idea what brie is, or, and I think that's the other beauty of moving around the world and travelling to different places, but not just travelling, just living there and really getting that depth and breadth of experience. And certainly I like to think that the children have really adapted to
that.
And
for you as well, that just learning how different cultures approach parenthood
Oh my gosh.
Birth. There are so many different ways to do this thing. I mean, it's the most universal thing, having a baby.
Yes.
But actually how interesting it is to see how different cultures do it.
I've always been amazed by that, always. And I think living in a number of different countries whilst pregnant or with children has been such an eye-opener for me around that. I mean, South Korea was fascinating. I remember once when Ella must have been about 8 months old. I mean, she was able to sit up in the little supermarket trolleys. So I guess she must have been about 8 or 9 months old, able to sit up. And someone had told me about Tesco coming to our area of South Korea. And I remember this huge excitement. I've got to go. And it was a 2.5-hour drive. And so drove with great excitement to this Tesco's. And I remember putting Ella in the trolley and really getting so excited, and got there, and slightly to my disappointment, discovering that absolutely everything was Korean and nothing there was English at all. And of course, everything was written in Korean. So I remember kind of thinking, well, okay, never mind. I'm here. I might as well do the shop. And looking at all these different packets of things on the shelves, all of which were completely, alien to me. I had no idea what they were. I couldn't read the Korean script or anything, and nothing was written in English. And so I remember just sort of desperately looking and being so focused on these packages that I wasn't really paying any attention to Ella. And when I stood up and looked round, she wasn't there. She wasn't there. She literally just wasn't there. The trolley was empty. And I looked up and down the aisle and I couldn't see her anywhere. Not that I expected her to be moving, because she couldn't move. She was stuck in the trolley. Yeah. And then I started panicking, and I had that awful kind of heart palpitating moment of, oh my gosh, someone's stolen my baby. Where is she? And eventually, having gone up and down 3 aisles, which felt like an eternity at that point, I eventually saw a big I sign in the middle of the store. It was a huge hypermarket. And I headed towards this eye, hoping that I'd be able to come up with some kind of body language. It's sort of, that sort of language. Because I didn't speak a word of Korean, saying I've lost my baby. And there was this gaggle of shop assistants all standing round her, and they were all inspecting every little part of her. They were touching her hair, they were pinching her cheeks, they were lifting up her little jumper.
Because she was very blonde, wasn't she?
Yeah. They even, as I approached, they were even undoing her nappy to have a look at whether she was a boy or a girl. I don't know. To this day, I don't know why they were doing that. But that shock, horror moment.
It sounds like you got there just in time.
Of her just being taken. And I remember at the time just being horrified by it, but also equally so relieved. And I remember just sort of taking her back and smiling and nodding at these shop assistants, who were all very sweet and very friendly. But then it happened again when we went exploring one weekend. And again, because of the language barrier, we didn't really know what people were saying to us. And we went to this little restaurant, and the waitress just came and plucked Ella out of the high chair and took her into the kitchen before we had the chance to even blink. Yeah. And we've gradually began to realise that actually what she was trying to do was help us to have our meal in peace and not to be distracted or worried about the baby. But of course, it's such a completely different way of doing things. So that was one interesting learning.
Very interesting. And a sort of the village mentality, that actually we're all in this together. Here's a mum who needs to do her shopping. Let's just give her some space.
There you go.
And that couple needs to have some time on their own.
There you go. And actually I came to really respect it and like it. And there were other elements of living in Korea that I found really, really different to start with and a little bit shocking. So they used to have, I could be completely wrong saying this, but a South Korean friend of mine said that Korean people will always want to touch something that's beautiful, because that will be something auspicious, and hopefully it will bring them luck. That was how she explained it to me. And I noticed that whenever I took Ella anywhere, and Ella was, as a baby, as you've said, she was very, very blonde. She had these big blue eyes, big round sort of
very munchable cheeks.
Chubby cheeks. And she was quite a chubby baby. And these people, I mean, total strangers would come up to me in the street and they just want to really pinch her cheeks, but really hard. And Ella hated it. You could see her flinching and sort of trying to push them away. But they would do that, or they would cradle the back of her head and want to really feel the shape of the back of her head. And that was also something that I found very odd. Or they'd look at her eyes and they would play with her eyes and a lot of touching, a lot of physical touching. And I used to scan the baby aisles in the supermarkets because I was interested in the different products that they had there and different things. And of course, I think, when you've got your first baby, especially a girl, you just want to go and buy lots of lovely little things for them to wear. And they had these extraordinary things. Well, I thought they were extraordinary. And they were like little tiny cushions the size of a donut. And they were everywhere in all the different baby shops and everything, these funny little donuts. And I had some friends who had Korean friends, South Korean friends who had babies while I was there. And these donut things kept appearing. And I learned that it's because naturally, I think Korean people tend to have quite flat skulls, and there was the desire for a more rounded head on their babies. So they would have these little donuts to try and encourage the back of the head to grow round.
How amazing.
Really interesting.
And that's so interesting because Tom and my grandmother, who was Switzerland, who was a children's nurse, amazingly, the first thing she always did was feel the back of the children's heads. And she'd always say, very nice shape, because if there's that was very interesting. Yeah. And then the other thing you said, rumour always has it, this is why I have such big cheeks, because growing up, people used to do that to me as well. I remember it to this day. And I always sort of joke that that's why my cheeks are quite so big. They just stayed that way. Yeah. So funny, isn't it? But it's a different thing. I mean, now imagine if you did that walking along the street in London, people would get very cross.
Here, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So I think, you're launched. I mean, I was just launched into this completely different world that I had no idea about. And I think I'm a naturally curious person. So I just wanted to find out about everything. And there are so many different beliefs, so many different occasions, so many different things. And South Korea was fascinating in that respect. So I remember a friend who was pregnant while I was there, a South Korean friend, married to an American. And she told me quite a lot about the interpretation of dreams when you're pregnant and what that can mean. And it can, those sort of things people believe in very, very strongly. And then there are lots of really lovely traditions, like there's a tradition for 100 days. So once your baby is 100 days old, there's a celebration. And that's such a lovely celebration because it's a celebration that is all about hope and positivity and the idea that your baby will, I guess these traditions go way back. The idea that your baby is going to survive, that it's already survived those first few months. And that's a really big special party. And it's like a first birthday. It's a really important moment in
ironically, that's probably
the
life. Day that you flew out to South Korea. It was about 100 days, wasn't it?
that was another thing that I learnt about, which was that there's a kind of disapproving element of being out and about with your baby in the very early days. I think traditionally Korean women are advised to stay at home for the first 3 weeks and not have any visitors, not to have anyone come to the house. And that's very much, I think that's even happened still today.
Yes, I'm sure.
Which in a way, I don't know, I think in a way you miss that magic of the newborn and sharing your newborn and all that excitement and grandparents
family allowed
visiting and all
in,
of that.
Or is it literally just you as a couple?
I don't know. I just know that that visits are discouraged.
Yes.
And you think about the flurry of excitement and flowers arriving and gifts arriving and everybody wanting to meet the baby and things that happen here. Whereas in Korea, everything's just a bit slower. It's a bit more measured. And very much that's the feeling around the end of pregnancy is that you slow down, you take it easy. People are very careful about what they eat and how they behave. And And all of that is meant to transfer to the baby. And, you know, it's a very calming way of doing things, which is quite interesting.
So interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. And then when, and yet when you were pregnant with William, you decided, actually, I think I'd rather have him in England rather than in South Korea, because the way of giving birth is quite different.
We lived in a really provincial place. I mean, we were on an island off the south coast of South Korea, which was away from any hospital. We had a little clinic. I suppose it was a little tiny hospital, and they had a maternity wing there. And that's where I went to see my gynecologist. But it was by no means a big hospital. If you wanted big hospitals, you had to take the ferry across to the mainland. So that was one element of concern. I suppose the other element of concern was timing, because I knew that if I was going to make the journey back to the UK, I was going to have to choose my timing quite carefully, because a lot of airlines won't let you fly after a certain cutoff in terms of number of weeks. I don't know what that is now, but at the time it was anywhere between 32 weeks and 36 weeks, and it might even be slightly earlier now. So there was a little bit of anxiety over timing, because I knew that my husband would only have a very, very limited amount of leave to be able to attend the birth and then be around when I needed him after or just before. And so, you know, so we went to have a look at the little clinic in this tiny little town where we lived on this tiny little island. And I remember being taken round by a very earnest and well-meaning person. I think she was one of the midwives. And she took me, first of all, into the delivery room. And honestly, it looked like something out of a horror movie. I mean, what was in the middle of this very stark room was a chair that looked much like a dentist's chair, quite narrow, with stirrups and lots of straps. I mean, even straps for wrists.
Gosh.
And I was told that once I went into labour, I would have to leave my husband. He would not be allowed into the delivery room with me. I would have to be there on my own. And that the normal practice was to strap you to the bed, because I think that I could be wrong, but maybe a breakdown in communication. But what I understood from that conversation was that they believe that staying as still as you can during childbirth is a good thing. And I'd already had the experience of having a child and knew that actually, for me, being able to move and sway my hips and do things like that was actually quite a helpful thing. And so the idea of being strapped to this chair was
without Tom by your side,
pretty overwhelming.
Yes.
And without any language. I mean, I really didn't speak any Korean. So the idea of being in a room full of people speaking to me in Korean or pidgin English and not having Tom there just felt scary. It just felt really scary. And then I learned that there are some other practices that just I wasn't sure about. So one is that your baby is taken away from you straight after you give birth. And the idea is to give the mother time to recuperate, time to rest, time to sleep. But the baby is looked after in a nursery in the hospital for 24 hours. And for me, it was so indoctrinated in me from everything I'd read here that there was so much in that initial skin-to-skin bonding moment. And, you know, I'd had that with Ella and I wanted it again with William. And I just didn't feel comfortable with the idea of them taking my baby away from me in those first few hours and minutes. And then, you know, another fact of not being allowed to take a shower immediately after the birth, which I just couldn't understand why. Again, it might well be to do with trying to make that bonding happen when the baby does eventually get returned to the mothers. If you're smelling particularly strong. Then you know you can have that bonding with your baby a bit more easily. But yeah, I think, and then there's a practice of giving a new mother nothing but seaweed soup to eat. And the idea of eating seaweed soup on any day at any time is somewhat worrying. But you know, to have nothing but seaweed soup, I'm sure it's full of wonderful nutritious goodness and minerals and I don't know what else. But I was sort of thinking about my buttered toast that I'd had in London and thinking, no, that's what I want. I want a cup of tea and buttered toast
or something, wasn't it? I mean, it was not like a day.
Months of seaweed soup. So and then a friend of mine at around that time that we went to look at the gynae setup, a Korean friend of mine, she had a baby and we went to visit this baby in the hospital. So I suppose was somewhat unusual given the visiting things. But anyway, we went to visit her and the baby. And in the maternity wing, they had turned off all the air conditioning. And it was really hot. I mean, this was summertime and it was hot and humid and there was air conditioning everywhere else in the hospital, but just not in the maternity wing. And it was a real, you walk through a set of double doors and the heat just hit you.
Yes.
And there was this friend of ours in a room wrapped in about 4 layers, including a duvet and a couple of blankets, absolutely sweating profusely, and the windows were firmly closed and the whole room was absolutely stifling. Anyway, she asked the nurse to go and get the baby, and the baby was wheeled in, and the baby was wrapped up in multiple layers as well. And this poor baby was also really, really, really sweating. And again, we're so indoctrinated here about temperature,
traditions,
keeping your baby at a certain temperature and keeping the room at a temperature. And, I know that thermometers are often a piece of quite important kit to have and all of that. But in Korea, it's a completely different thing. And they believe that both the baby and the mother's bones are very, very soft. And there's an element, I'm sure, that's absolutely right. And your bones move in order to allow you to give birth and all of that. And there's a belief that if you get very cold, that your bones will kind of freeze in place almost, and they won't move back in the natural way that they're meant to. So that's all part of giving birth in Korea as well, which I found absolutely fascinating. Completely different belief structure.
Yes.
But not for me. I mean, I think when I'd seen the bed with the stirrups,
that was a helpful visit. Well, that goes back to actually knowledge, doesn't it? So researching what the options are.
Yes.
If you're in a position to choose, and then choosing something that feels more comfortable, given that we don't really have a choice anyway, in terms of we don't really know when the little one's coming, how they're going to arrive, what it's, there's lots that's out of our control. But I guess we can choose a hospital that's close to us and familiar and, whatever country we live in. So that's very interesting. And then, of course, you timed it perfectly. So you sweetly, so this was one of the greatest honours of my life when Melissa, you called me and said, could you be my birth partner if Tom doesn't pitch up? Because he was working month on, month off, I think. It was very tight.
It was very tight.
In any case. And you came over with Ella, which is a whole different thing because hours worth of journeying with a toddler and heavily pregnant on your own, I think. So we must talk a little bit about top tips to travel because you are a very experienced lady when it comes to that. But anyway, so the call, and I'm a little bit queasy, but of course, how can I say no? I mean, that's just such an honour. So I said, of course I will, secretly hoping that maybe Tom might come in time. And I remember to this day, you called me the day before and said, look, it's all fine. Tom's coming tomorrow. He's on the plane. I haven't had the baby yet. You're off the hook. And I was a little bit, probably in equal measure, relieved. And sad. So I said, okay, well, that's fine. And you, quick as a flash, was like, but if you feel you want to be there for a life experience moment, to be honest, I won't even notice who's in the room. So come on over. And if I might just share this story, my recollection of it, and I can't believe William's just turned 19. It's ridiculous. Anyway, I was working full tilt as ever. I get the call up. He said, right, come on, Winchester Hospital. It's now. If you're going to come, you should come now. And I remember sort of, pelting down the M3, thinking, I've got to make it. And it took me quite a long time to negotiate my way in because I'm family, but not, close. I'm just a sister-in-law. That was quite difficult to negotiate my way into the labour room. Anyway, by the time I tumbled into the labour room, it was perfect timing. Perfect, because it felt very respectful because I wasn't there for the exact birth, because that was for you and Tom. But I was there with the arrival of me greeted by these two faces of complete astonishment, yours and Tom's, that, oh my gosh, we just had a baby. And then William was there, and I heard this midwife going, who wants to cut the cord? And you were like, well, obviously not me. Tom was like, no. And she was like, well, does Auntie want to cut the cord? And I was like, something in my bones is I don't want you to do it. I feel I need to. I for some reason, I felt it was my responsibility. And then she said, come on over, let's do it. And I said, and I remember saying, no, I must wash my hands. And she said, no, it's fine. Come on. And I said, and I remember so clearly, but I've just come from London. I must hold on, everybody. So I then went over, took my time, washed my hands. And then, of course, in the moment, I was crying. It was such a huge deal. And then you got really cold. And it was the days where we didn't have mobiles. And so there was one phone on the ward on a wheelie stand. So I had to wheel into the room that you could make a phone call to your parents, my parents, to say, the baby has arrived. And then I think I sort of bustled around getting blankets and making tea and that was that. And you left a few hours later. Extraordinary. Extraordinary. What a gift of a moment. You were such a superhero, honestly. Absolutely amazing.
Well, I was just so grateful to have you there. And I think that, I don't know if you would, well, I'm sure you'd agree actually, that I think you and Will have had the most amazing bond.
I love that boy. I try not to remind him of, how we met. But it's a real privilege. It's a massive life moment. And what trust from you and Tom. I mean, my goodness me. But I just felt I had to do it for him. I don't know what came over me, because I'm really not good with hospitals and stuff. But I sort of thought, well, if I'm ever going to step up, now is the moment. Now is the moment. But yeah, I love him. I love all your three like my own. I mean, amazing children. And then the extraordinary thing then that ensued is you did so many trips on your own back to South Korea with two children under 2. And small age gaps, travelling on your own. What would you say to our listeners who might be sitting here breastfeeding?
Actually, I was struck, having made so many flights with little children. I mean, I think Ella had completed in the high 20s of flights before she even got to the age of 1.
Amazing.
And so, and long flights. I mean, it was a 26-hour journey door to door with 3 separate flights to get from our house in South Korea to our home in England. So it was a big old journey. And I remember speaking to friends who had children who were just too scared to fly or to travel with children or just a bit too overwhelmed by the whole thing, mostly anxious about the flight, oddly. But I had a really good friend in South Korea, an English girl called Cora, and Cora had children exactly the same age as my 2.
Thank goodness for Cora.
Thank goodness for Cora. And actually, we ended up living, we were neighbours, and we spent I think our front doors were open most of the time. We used to just let the children run in between our 2 apartments. And Cora and I used to plan our journeys home in minute detail. So we would sit together over a cup of coffee and we would just play what we called the worst case scenario game. And we would literally conjure up all sorts of different scenarios of what could possibly go wrong and how could we be prepared for that situation. And those ranged from anything from, I mean, she did actually have this happen to her once where her son, I mean, a little baby. When you take off, just before you take off, the air hostess gives you a little extra seatbelt that you have to attach to your seatbelt, and you then have to attach that around your baby. So you have to have your baby in your lap, and she had just got Charlie all set up with his seatbelt, and at that point you cannot move. You cannot take your seatbelts off, and the plane is literally about to move. And it was at that moment that Charlie decided to have an absolutely massive explosion diarrhea moment, and it was really bad. I mean, there are really bad moments, and that was one, a proper poonami, and it went all over him, all over his baby grow, all over her, all over the seat because it just wouldn't, it couldn't be contained.
But you see, I think it's quite impressive that one small child can make that amount from not that much of a bottle. I think it's incredible.
It was really dramatic. And so she always used to play that. She always used to say, having that experience, I'm always going to make sure that I've got a change of clothes for him, but also a change of clothes for me. And she said, I'm never going to wear white for exactly that reason, just in case.
So, look at us wearing white now. We've come through it.
We've done it. But, so that was one. But there was another friend who ended up having to make an emergency landing somewhere in northern Siberia because there was engine trouble on the plane. And I can imagine people sitting and listening and sort of quaking and thinking, well, that's exactly why I don't want to travel with my children. But she ended up really stranded in this little hut in the middle of Siberia, and it was cold and they didn't know how long it was going to take to get a new plane and luckily she was just a very, very organised lady, and she'd packed extra food in little pots for her child, and managed to make do. But I think that worst case scenario game was often quite a giggle, and we'd just sit round the table and kind of go, well, what could go wrong? And we'd replay some of those experiences in our minds. And I think ultimately it's just about thinking ahead. It's just about preparing, making sure you've got changes of clothes, enough nappies, but not just for the journey, but for extra time in case you get delayed. But it's also about how can you make things easier for you. So I used to hate travelling with buggies, absolutely hated it, because I had so many problems where either the buggy didn't turn up. There was one time I came back to England on my own with 2 children under the age of 2, and the buggy was left in Amsterdam and never arrived in England. I mean, that was just, and I remember turning up in tears at the lost baggage counter going, what am I going to do? I can't carry both my children at the same time.
Plus all the luggage.
Plus all the luggage. I'm all on my own. And they were so lacking in sympathy. It was unreal. And then another time when our double buggy was actually bent and totally damaged. So I learned quite quickly that travelling with buggies can actually be more problematic than it's worth. And
that is specifically if you leave the buggy at the gate. So actually the advice is perhaps if you take it, put it in a transport bag and check it, because that way it won't get damaged, and then take your baby carrier or the little travel plan that goes into the overhead locker.
And that way you know that hopefully it'll turn up on the belt and it won't be dirty or scuffed or, any of the, or broken. Because sometimes when you leave your buggy at the gate, they say they'll bring it to the gate, the other end, or they'll put it on the belt. But sometimes it just doesn't happen. What they've told you doesn't happen. So I learned that actually the baby carrier, which I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation as one of my favourite pieces of kit, absolutely brilliant, because you can stuff it in a bag. You can wear it very easily. It frees up arms for toddlers and extra bags and everything else. And actually that ended up being such a great piece of kit. And I could use it when I had to do my long stopovers in Paris or Amsterdam on the way back from Korea. I could use it as a changing mat.
Brilliant.
As well. So, there were lots of different uses that were quite clever. So,
Oh my gosh, amazing.
So be prepared is my top tip for traveling.
And also, I think to your experience, actually just do it.
Yeah, actually.
Because it's stressful in the moment, moving countries, travelling lots, there's loads of stress and loads of actually tough times. But now looking back on all of that, because then you went to live in Holland and Amelia was born in Holland. Different, again, I'd love to touch quickly on their traditions. And then you lived in Dubai and then now Tom's in Canada. There's the travel continues. But looking back, no regrets.
Oh gosh, none at all. And I would say, hands down, if you're thinking about travelling, if you want to travel, don't let your baby get in the way. Just go and do it. And there are all kinds of amazing things now with various different hotels that will do things like help you heat your milk or help you, sterilize bottles or produce baby food. And, it's actually, if you start looking, there's an awful lot out there to facilitate being able to travel with a baby or a toddler and without it having to feel too overwhelming. And I think very much go with the flow. One brilliant tip for traveling with a toddler, the sort of child that wants to get up and walk up and down the aisle and up and down the aisle and for the whole flight, and you get those a lot, is actually just to have a little tiny, either a box or a bag or something, little soft bag full of little things, whether that's a lipstick case or a key or obviously not something that they can swallow that could harm them, but just little tiny things. And I had a bag that was full of little tiny pots that had lids.
Yes.
And it used to keep my children occupied for hours, putting the little pots in and out of the bag, undoing the lids, fiddling around, making little games. Yeah. Just that in itself was a really, really great thing to have.
Amazing.
But also snacks, little tiny,
so
pots
food
of
is
raisins,
important, actually, isn't it?
little pots of little kind of crackers or Cheerios or something like that. Again, it can keep a child amused and quiet for quite a long time.
Yes. And actually, I think also people aren't listening as much as you think they are. Because when it's your child on a plane, you think, oh my gosh, the whole plane hates me. But actually people zone. And now everyone's on their AirPods and they're sort of zoning out a little bit more. It's quite interesting that,
but
isn't it?
Maybe, if it is something that's worrying, and I know a lot of people get anxious about travelling anyway, but maybe it's just about starting short. So don't go and plan a great big trip to South Korea straight away.
No, but take a car journey somewhere to leave the house for a night. Yeah.
Yeah, or take a plane. Yeah. But go on a short hop for a city break or something instead.
Where the language is the same and familiar food. And I always think holidays with children are more alternative living rather than holidays. So if you take the key things that are familiar to you at home, I mean, I used to, oh my gosh, I took the sterilizer. I took some big stuff that really you didn't need to take, but I knew that would keep me calm. And the other thing I took, if we were using the hotel travel cot, I would take our sheets that were washed in our laundry liquid. And this is a really interesting thing because the sheets from the hotels are often bleached. And then you arrive on holiday and your baby the next day has a rash and you think, oh my gosh, it's meningitis. But actually it's just because they've had a reaction to the hotel laundry detergent. So if they smell your sheets and you have a waterproof sheet on the bottom, so effectively you're taking a mattress, so waterproof sheet, fitted sheet, they feel familiar as well. So little things that you can take that seem a bit ridiculous, but actually you want to go away wanting to go back away again, rather than thinking, I've done this once, I'm never going to do this ever again. So taking enough to feel familiar, but also realising you don't need that much, actually, because it's just you and your time and, it's an amazing thing. And then the other amazing or universal feeling, I think, is do we work, do we not? I mean, what I just is so interesting to share what you've been through in the last very recent, within 20 years, that still happens now. So when you're capable, you had your own career, you want to work, you have children, and you have stamped in your passport that you're not allowed to work because of the country you're living in.
So that happened to me, I think, in 2 different countries. I think in South Korea, it was literally a big red stamp stamped right across my entry visa that said not allowed to work. I mean, literally just said not allowed to work. And then when we went to live in the Middle East, in Dubai, the same thing, just housewife. Not allowed to work or something to that.
And there's an expression, isn't there? A lot of the expat wives are called trailing spouses.
I hate that
or husbands, the person. But I mean, how it's just not good. We've got to change that. We need to change that. I think we should start a movement.
I agree. It's so debasing. And it's an awful term. And it does. It makes you feel as if you're following in someone else's wake. And so it totally takes any sense of pride or sense of who you are away from you. So I think that That was tough. I mean, I think things have changed now. I think now companies are beginning to recognise that, you know, partners also need to be able to work. And actually, my husband's working in Canada at the moment, and certainly they've recognised that I should be allowed in on a working visa, which I can do.
Wow.
So that's good. And I think, you know, finally, here we are. 25 years later, and suddenly I'm allowed to go into that country on a working visa. Great. But yes, I mean, trying to figure out a career around moving around the world and having children is definitely not an easy dynamic. But I think, like all these things, it's important to look on the positive and to look back at the positives. And I would say that the positives are that I've been much more resourceful, I think, about trying to find work. So, for example, in Dubai, I wasn't allowed to work, but I managed to help with some marketing for a local company in return for free goods and services. And then, you know, I took up a little bit of editing that I could do online. And I look back at that and I think, well, I haven't had a linear career, but I've had what I think is now called a zigzag career. And I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the fact that I've learned different skills along the way. I'm not siloed in one particular area of thinking. I did eventually end up changing my sponsorship detail in Dubai and ended up being able to work for a fantastic company that wanted to set up offices, a UK-based company, but they wanted to set up offices in the Middle East. And that was a really amazing experience.
And that was wonderful,
wasn't it? I really enjoyed that. Yeah, definitely. But then there was that whole, you know, changing from being a stay-at-home mum full-time to suddenly, you know, having to hand over the reins to a nanny and a driver and working very long hours and not having that same level of involvement with my children. And actually, I found that weirdly, having felt I'd lost my identity when I gave up my job to have children, I then had this loss of identity as a mother, handing over really key moments of the day. So, you know, I would get back from work and the children would already have had their bath and would already be in their pajamas. And if I was lucky, I'd have just enough time to read them a story. But I felt as if I was being stripped of those little moments that for me was so precious about being a mother. I used to love that time of day, you know, when they're all sort of snuggly and sleepy and you can hear what they've been up to all day long. And, you know, so I think as a mother, so many adjustments you have to make all the way through the journey, whether you're at home or whether you're abroad, it's the same.
It really is. It's so interesting hearing that from you. And this feeling still, and I talk about this quite a lot, is that we are expected to work as if we don't have children and be a mother as if we don't have a job. And there is still an element of that. It's shifting a little bit. But actually, it's really hard to do both. And yet, as parents, we're raising the next generation. So, you know, I just want to put parents on a pedestal more because I feel we've lost that a little bit, because it's almost like for companies, perhaps a little bit of an inconvenience if you have a child, because that's going to, you know, disrupt the whole order of things. But actually, I think you've talked wisely about, you know, speaking ahead of time with bosses about perhaps setting their expectations of it's okay to take a career break. And, you know, there are seasons. I always, you know, there are seasons in the day, you know, so as a parent, you might, oh my gosh, this day's a disaster. My child hasn't slept all night. I've had a horrible morning. They've had a meltdown in the supermarket. And it's like, but actually the afternoon is gorgeous and you've had a lovely walk in the park and they've just given you an unexpected kiss or a hug, and the evening's even better because you've had a lovely snuggly story moment. But the seasons that come with being a parent, and a new parent where you're really fully involved because you have to be there and you want to be there, but then how do you juggle the working season and the mothering and the fathering season, you know, all those seasons. I love your idea about the zigzag career because actually doing things, you know, we have to work because we have to earn money. So how do we fit that in with parenting so we feel that we've given enough of ourselves to our children and contributed to the household finances and all of that, but actually then leaving time for you as a parent.
Yeah.
Because that often is completely forgotten.
Yeah.
Because we've got to look after the children and the husband and the parents and the, cousins and the...
And I think what's important, I think it's very easy to separate the two roles, of work and being a parent. And I think society makes us do that quite a bit. And I think certainly in my head, I was doing that as well. So, I'd be doing things like, I don't know, hiding in a cupboard to make a work call or something in order to prevent any children being heard or something like that, which is ridiculous. And I think what's happened during COVID and all those wonderful interviews that we saw on TV with people, trying to be very, very sort of smart and serious.
Pajamas under the table, but
and then little children running in. And, I think that's lessened a bit now. I think people have become more understanding to home working and children being around in the background and the reality of that. Which is really lovely to see. But I think, the other thing is, because of that siloed thinking, we don't necessarily think how much we've learned as a parent and how many new skills we've gained. And I always chuckle when my husband, who's quite, he's got quite a serious job, and he'll come home from work and he'll go, goodness me, I've had to sort out this huge personnel issue. And I'm so pleased that, because it reminded me of when the children were 2 and 4 and they were squabbling over that toy, and he's learned those skills of how to manage a situation in a really calm and measured and fair way. And he's transferred that and taken it into the office.
Yes.
And I think as working mums, we can do exactly the same thing and not be ashamed of it, but actually embrace it. And I've got a friend who set up a company specifically to support anyone, whether it's a parent or a carer, needing to take a career break in order to be able to look after someone at home.
Yes.
And, she actually started a diary system where she suggests that you keep a diary of all the different things that you've done as a parent as you go, because actually you forget.
You do forget.
But actually you think back to all the different skills. You've been a PA, because you've been managing all, in my case, I have had to manage 5
an executive PA, I would
diaries.
say. Yeah. 5-star.
So, you're managing diaries. You're becoming quite good at health. I know quite a lot of first aid now and what to do in certain situations. So, you learn that.
Yeah.
But, you also get involved, or I certainly got involved a lot with things like the PTA and the school events and
children love it when you're involved with a school, don't they?
They do. Yeah. They really do.
Really special thing.
I think that's another top parenting tip, actually, because not only do the children really love you coming in and love the fact that their parent is there, but I think you also learn a lot more about the inner workings of the school. You get to know the teachers. You get to know perhaps some of the other children a bit better as well. And that's very enriching and really lovely, because you can then share that with your children and have a bit more of a shared experience with them. But yes, I think all those things are things that are worth noting down and remembering, because actually they're all transferable skills. And you're just even managing a household budget.
Yes.
Managing, the vast extra expenditure that you have during the summer holidays versus, during term time where you might have a bit more of a regular routine. You don't need to entertain the children as much.
Yeah.
All of that is all really valuable experience. And I think, as you were saying, we ought to be putting mothers and fathers who've gone through that much more on a pedestal and recognizing that as life experience that is so valuable in the workplace.
So valuable. It really is. And there's a very wonderful top tip, I think, as well, that you shared with me about the CV. So if you're thinking of taking a break, and you might not have told your boss at this point, because you think you're having you might not even know, actually, because I don't think we really know when we go on maternity leave. But in any case, make sure your LinkedIn and your CV is fully up to date the day you stop work.
Well, it's just like, embarking on a journey. And we talked about earlier about when you're traveling and you're embarking on a journey, be prepared. Just be prepared and think ahead and imagine the different scenarios. It's exactly the same thing, I think, when you're planning to take a career break.
Yeah.
And it's things like you might be in the middle of a training program. You might be in the middle of doing something. Why don't you complete those? Try and make it a thing to complete those so they're not hanging over your head, because you don't know how long you're going to be off sometimes. You might decide that you can't stand being a stay-at-home mum and you're itching to get back behind your desk and with your colleagues. And
your partner takes over and you go back at 6 months.
Exactly.
It's all of it's fine. There's no wrong or right answer.
Or you might decide that actually you can't bear to leave your child and you just actually don't want to go back to work.
Yeah.
But you don't know, and you don't know how long that gap's going to be. So I think, make sure you complete any of those training modules that you might be doing, but also just think ahead. So make sure that you've captured all of the different projects that you're working on right now, all the things that you're doing, all those skills that you've got, because once you become a mum and your focus has been directed in a completely different place and you've spent quite a few weeks or months or years out of the office and out of the workplace, it's really hard to remember back and to remember back that sort of nitty-gritty detail. So really good to write it all down now and have your CV ready now, so that when you're ready to go back, you can look at that CV and go, oh yes, I remember doing that.
Or actually, that was quite impressive. I mean, I remember I read one of my university essays recently, and I was like, "Gosh, that's quite good." I could never write it now. So in that moment, just making sure everything's up to date, and so that if someone says, "Actually, do you want to work on this project?" or "I've got this thing," could you just send over your bio or your LinkedIn or what? You've got it, because. Of course, in the moment, it's really hard to do it, actually, a few years later, isn't it?
It really is.
If you were to give one pearl of wisdom to someone expecting their first baby, what would it be?
So can I have two?
You may. Yes, because I feel like I'm on Desert Island Disc now.
Yeah, no, I'm going to ask for two because we were given a pearl of wisdom by the most lovely lady who, I have no idea who she was, but she owned a B&B somewhere near Oxford.
Yes.
And we turned up when I was very newly pregnant and I was a bit fussy about my egg in the morning. And so she cottoned on. And she said, how are you
your
feeling?
hard-boiled egg rather than your egg creating a baby egg.
This is my breakfast egg. And she said, how are you feeling? And Tom and I both looked at her and said, we're quite anxious, we're quite nervous about what sort of parents we're going to be. And obviously we're worried about, and I think you do, worry, don't
everything.
you, all the time.
Yes.
And she said, there's nothing to worry about. She said, all children need is food and love. That's all they need. And that has stayed with me absolutely all the way through. And the more I think about it, it's such simple advice. But actually, it's so true.
Yeah.
And I think so often we would just worry and worry and worry and worry and worry about our children. Have we said the right thing? Have we taught them the right thing?
Yeah.
Are they wearing the right clothes? Are they at the right school? Are they, and you just worry about everything. But actually, ultimately, they just need love and they need feeding. And if you can just remember that, it's a really good way of just stepping back from all the madness that can surround bringing up children. So I love that one. And I just want to pass that on to every new parent, because I think it's a magical piece of advice, which I have followed to the letter.
And you are an excellent cook.
So that would be my one to share. And then my one, I think, is just to follow your intuition. And don't get too hung up on the books and the Bibles and the and the sort of the surroundings that you might be in. And I think I've learned that one from traveling to so many different countries and having children in so many different countries and learning different belief structures and different ideas and different ideals. And I think ultimately it comes down, we're deeply intuitive people, and especially parents. You'll know, what's right, what's wrong. You know how you want your child to respond to a certain situation. You know you want them to try lots of different things. You know you want them to learn to ride a bike or whatever. You know that you know those things. And I think just go run with that intuition. And that would be my own personal top tip.
I love that. Mum knows best. There is a little element of that actually as a mum particularly, and as a parent, no one will ever know your children as well as you do. And following that, so if someone at school suggested they should do something different and you think, actually no, for that particular child, I think perhaps they might
and there's
go a
so
different
many
route
different
than just
scenarios.
follow. That's an intuition thing again, isn't it?
So many scenarios, like, whether or not you should make them continue to learn the trombone, or if they're really hating it, do you let them give it up?
Yeah.
And again, it'll be an intuitive feeling. It was for me.
Yeah.
Or do you, particularly around school choices, that was a really interesting area where very intuitive, the realization that actually one school might not be quite right for the second child. It might be better for him to go to a different school because actually he's a different person with different sets of interests and skills and whatever else. So, I think being intuitive and listening to your intuition is really important, I think, as a parent.
And acting on it. Yeah. Melissa, thank you. It's been a joy.
I've really enjoyed it.
Will you come back?
You.
I feel we've got so much
more to talk about. We have.
But thank you for joining me. I loved that. And wow, what a wonderful couple of decades you've spent, and you have your legacy of these 3 glorious children who make their own ripple effects in the world. And thank you for sharing everything with us today.
Me. Pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, please do like, share and subscribe to our Anita's List podcast show to stay up to date with our latest conversations. Together, we can all be part of the village to support new parents.